seen you clearer than now. We're flying high.
And today I'm gonna hit you with the 3 most important hip stretches for every goalie. I'm gonna go get changed into my kit and then we'll head down to the lab.
I know if it's real, cause when we're doing our thing, we're the wheels that won't stop turning.
So although it's impossible to say what the best hip stretch for you is, because that depends on so many variables. It depends on your age, your training, your experience with training, your injury history, even the level that you play at. So it's impossible to say, yeah, this is the best stretch for every single goalie. But today I'm going to give you the 3 most important stretches for every goalie. Stretches that essentially every goalie will benefit from and most of you are not doing. In episode number 2 of this series, we talked about what you should do before you start stretching or instead of stretching if you're looking to unlock some hidden flexibility. So if you missed that one, make sure you check it out. I'll try to put a link somewhere, definitely in the description, but it's episode 2 of this series. And now let's get to your 3 exercises. The first one we're gonna start with is a half kneeling hip internal rotation. This is essentially your half butterfly position. And I like this half kneeling position because, as you can see, it's probably the most functional position, you know, for working butterfly on the ice. I'm up tall in my hips aren't flexed. We have other mobility exercises from different positions, but I really like this one for its specificity. So that's why I picked it for this video. So here's how we get into it. Basically, we just start in our half kneeling position. The setup is a little bit funny, so we'll take some time going over it. I'm in my half kneeling position, and now I'm really just backing into the wall a little bit, bringing my foot out, bringing myself into sort of a half butterfly flare. But what you have to check is that your pelvis is still pointing straight ahead. So, for example, I could bring this knee way in there. Well, that looks like I have a really wide flare, doesn't it? But my pelvis is actually pointing over here. And how do I know that? Well, I put my fingers on these bony prominences on the front of my pelvis. It's called my ASIS, my anterior superior iliac spine. And when I put my fingers on them, if I imagine that they were flashlights, they're aiming over there to the corner. So I want to come out enough so that when I put my fingers, if those were flashlights, they're still aiming straight ahead. So this is a good position for me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to really use my strength to kind of crank myself around in this position. I'm basically just going to take up the slack. So I'm just going to come in till I feel the onset of a little bit of tightness there, and then I'm going to hold it. Really important that you don't get carried away and think, oh, I'm going to actually really get that internal rotation and force it, because you could actually be doing harm to your hip joint by doing that. So you're just going to come along until you take the slack out of the system, till you feel a little tension. You're not going to feel like a stretch. Like when you stretch your quads, you know, you feel that muscle like, oh, that's a big stretch. This is just going to feel a little more like a tightness. So we'll come into that position. We'll hold it for 30 to 60 seconds, and then we'll do the other side. This next one won't look all that earth-shattering. You're not going to be like, oh my God, I've never seen that before. But it's an important one. It's a hip flexor stretch. So, and we're going to get, with this one, we're going to focus on our deep hip flexors. Our iliopsoas is sort of a combination of 2 muscles, our iliacus and our psoas. And the reason I picked this one is two reasons. One is we spend a lot of time in a flexed hip position. Anytime we're sitting, even when you're on the ice in your ready stance, you're in a flexed hip position. So it makes sense that these muscles will accommodate and shorten, because that's the position they're in most of the day. Even when we sleep, if you're like me, you know, I sleep on my side with my knees pulled up. So my hips are never in an extended position. It's a stretch that you probably all do. A lot of you do it with your teams. But I see more goalies doing, and athletes in general, doing this exercise wrong than almost anything else. So here's what we're going to do. We're trying to feel just a gentle stretch in here. Some of you might feel it into your thigh, and that just suggests that that thigh portion of your hip flexor, your rectus femoris, is probably the tightest link in the chain, and that's where you're feeling it. But we're just going to feel like a gentle stretch up in here. And the key to doing this is not getting forward. So that's what I see, or I see, you know, people hanging out, leaning forward, or even keeping their chest up and leaning forward. But our hip doesn't actually extend this far. So anatomically, your hip doesn't extend this far. Anatomically, it extends, about that far. So when we go further than that, that's actually our pelvis is tilting and we're extending through our back. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but if you watch anybody doing this, they're extending through their back, or they're going to lean forward, and then that's sort of taking some of the tension off their hip anyway. When we do it, we're going to get tall in our torso. We're going to think about tucking our bum underneath a little bit, and then just slowly gliding a little bit straight forward this way until we bring in that little tension, that little stretch in the front of the hip. It's same as the last one. It's not going to be like that big stretch you feel when you do your quadriceps or your hamstrings. It's going to be more subtle than that. Stay tall in your torso. Use your abdominals to kind of tuck your bum underneath a little bit, and then feel that gentle stretch. You'll hold that for 30 to 60 seconds on each side. So you've heard me talk a lot about how our muscles work in chains, and how groin injuries happen, maybe not because your groin is too tight or your adductors are too tight. Maybe it's because something else in that chain of muscles is tight. So for example, my adductors kind of have that connection. We talked about it in last video about fascia. You know, it has that fascial integration with our abdominal obliques. Well, maybe these are actually a little bit too stiff, and so when I'm extended and then I have to rotate, well, maybe this is what's overloading the system, but that is what pays the price. So we don't just move on the ice sort of one muscle at a time. We move in these complex and sometimes crazy and completely unpredictable patterns. It's one of the things that makes goaltending so amazing, and why there's so much risk of injury. So we're going to get in our half kneeling groin position. So here I'm in about as big of a half kneeling groin position as I can get without having to bring my body forward or sit my bum back. So I want you staying up tall in your hips. You should feel a stretch in your groin as you do this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reach across. So I'm going to reach towards my ankle, and then I'm going to rotate away. And I'll hold that away position for about 3 seconds. Then I'm going to come back, and I'm going to go a little deeper. See, now I've actually touched to my ankle. You'll pick what works for you. It doesn't, you know, maybe you'll start and you'll just get as far as your mid shin. Go with what feels good to you without forcing it. So we'll come up here, 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to go a little further, midfoot, back up, 1, 2, 3. I know where my progressions are because I use this one all the time. I use it every time before I do synthetic ice practice or go on the ice. You will have to learn what your landmarks are. So I know the next one, boom, I'm going right to my toe, and then 1, 2, 3. And when I rotate up and away, I'm just trying to rotate. I don't want to hyperextend my back and extend my back that way. I'm just rotating and reaching around, trying to lengthen that chain. So you will do 6 to 8 on each side with a 3-second hold on that up and away reach. So these 3 mobility drills that I gave you are the exact same ones that you'll find in literally every single pro goalie program that I'm doing this off season. Not necessarily in every single phase, but at the right time, that'll be in their program. And do you want me to give you a bonus tip? Do you want me to give you a bonus stretch? And it's not even for your hip, it's for a different part of your body that helps your hip, will help your hip work. Well, it'll help your hip feel like it's working a little better. If you do, now would be the time to hit like. We'll do a tradesies, that's fair. I'll wait and see how many likes I get. Ooh, that's a lot of likes. Okay, let me show it to you. It is active dorsiflexion. So what is active dorsiflexion? Well, it's a fancy name for flexing at your ankle joint, basically. flexion. I don't know why they don't just call it ankle flexion, but that would make it too easy, and then, you know, kids wouldn't flunk their anatomy exams, that kind of thing. So all we're gonna do, so why is it important, I guess, for starters? Well, when you're in your ready stance, you know, when you're getting in your low position, the deeper you can get into dorsiflexion, the lower you can get, but still keep that good contact on your blades. So that's important. The other place that it's important a little bit is, when you're coming down, when you're down into your RVH, you know, it lets you kind of get your blade, or even recovering from your RVH or butterfly pushing, it lets you get more of your blade on the ice. So you're not, I know sometimes you choose, I'm going to push a little more off my toe or push a little more off my heel, but that should be a decision that you make based on where you're trying to go, not just, oh, like I can't actually get my whole blade on the ice right now because I don't have enough ankle dorsiflexion. So the way we improve it is pretty easy, and it's another one that typically improves really, really quickly. We just can get in a half kneeling position. You can do it from standing as well if you wish, but we're just gliding our knee as far as we can over our toes without our heel coming off the ground. So we just glide in there, pause, and come back. This one's a little bit funny. I actually had a message from a new turning pro goalie this week who said, well, I don't really feel the stretch when I do that. Am I doing something wrong? No, you're not doing something wrong. What you're gonna feel is just kind of a tightness in this lower third of your calf, sort of where your Achilles is. That's all you're gonna feel. So if you're feeling that, you know you're doing it right. If you're not feeling that at all, well then see if you can go further. If you're feeling a pinch in the front of your ankle or a block in the front of your ankle, then that means there's some sort of impingement, which again, doesn't mean you need surgery. It just means that you might need a little bit of mobilization on that ankle joint to free it up. Maybe you've sprained it at some point. Ankles are so funny because they're like a little puzzle, like a little 3D puzzle that's put together with little bones. And sometimes one of those little bones in your foot can get out of position a bit, and then that can jam up the ankle joint. So you would need a physical therapist or a manual therapist of some sort to help sort of mobilize or manipulate that back in place, and then you're like, oh, that, you know, that feels way, way better. So we're just gonna get in there. We'll hold for about 2 seconds. I just feel a gentle pull back here. I come out of it. I come back into it. And you can even change the angle. So now I'm going out over my pinky toe. Now I'm coming in over my big toe. I'm just working that range. And you would do about 10 in total with a 2 to 3 second hold in that end position. So that is your bonus tip. Don't tell anybody, it's sort of a secret. More bonus stuff, if you want a free mobility program that'll help you get a wider butterfly flare in less than 2 weeks, yes, it honestly works, then check out the link in the description below, or just go to your app store and search Butterfly Challenge, and you can download it there. It's totally free. If on the other hand you're looking for more of a pro style mobility program, then that would be strategicmobility.com. You can go check that one out right now. And finally, now I'm going to ask you for something. I'm going to ask you, how many of you do yoga as your primary mobility training, or think of it as your primary mobility training? Just leave a little comment below. In the next video, it's going to be my anti-yoga video. It's not as bad as it sounds. I'll explain what it means when we get there. But I'm just interested to know how many of you still rely on yoga or think of yoga as your best bet for mobility training. So I'm gonna get to work on that right now. You guys have a great rest of the day. I will catch you next time. Whoosh.